out by 1 o'clock. I'm super excited to have Shona McGlashan today of McGlashan Consulting. I wish I had her accent. I long for her accent. I have Scottish roots and we have many stories to share, but excited. You can see that Shona is and is a governance professional with over 25 years of experience in the UK and in Canada. She's previously served as VP of Governance at Advanced City Credit Union and the Chief Governance Officer at Mountain Equipment Co-op. And I believe that is where I met you, Shona,
Yep.
when you were at Mountain Equipment Co-op, and also I've met you at the Governance Professionals of Canada, and we've just kept in touch. I love the work that you're doing. I know you currently serve on boards. You are the chair of Pain BC and the vice chair of Bard on the Beach. And your work is in the intersectionality of governance and well-being. And that is what our topic is on today is boards and their well-being. And it's a topic that doesn't get discussed very often. And we were super excited. Women Get on Board was excited to partner with you and Governance Professionals of Canada to do a survey. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you have a few slides to share with us. So Shona, over to you.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Deborah. Hi, everybody. I'm Shona McGlashan, and I'm joining you today from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in Vancouver, BC. It's a beautiful spring day here, and in the Hunkkaminam language of the Coast Salish peoples, spring is called Yaquakelis, which means warmer weather is coming, and I for one, am absolutely ready for it. But thank you for having me today. And so I wanted to start, we're going to get into our fireside chat, but I wanted to start by sharing with you all some of the high level results of what's Canada's first pulse check survey on well-being and governance, the intersection of well-being and governance. So this began as a bunch of conversations last year. And then this spring, we launched the pulse check survey. We had over 140 respondents, both board directors and governance professionals. So if you are one of the respondents of the survey, thank you so much for providing the information because that's the data that we've based it on. And what we wanted to look at was how are people experiencing their governance roles? Because, you know, as Deborah says, there's a lot of, we spend a lot of time talking about board effectiveness and board cultures and risk and resilience and boards and AI and so on. But this was a conversation that we hadn't really started yet. And as Deborah says, a lot of my work is in governance. That's my professional background, but I have also run well-being and workplace mental health strategies and done work in that area. So I was really interested in what's happening when we combine those two pieces. So as I said, the work encompasses both board directors and governance professionals. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to be mostly talking about board directors because that's where Women Get on Board is doing its great work, and that's probably what most of you have come to hear. I will be doing some more conversations about the governance professionals aspect. So you know, come follow me on LinkedIn if you want to find out more about that. But let's just, before we get into the conversation, let me just give you a very high overview of what we found, what board directors told us about their well-being in 2026. So first of all, there's some really good news here, right? Board directors score nearly 7.8 out of 10 for life satisfaction, and that is higher than the Canadian average. Okay, so this is good news. It's not necessarily surprising to me because when you think about board directors, they tend to be people who have economic resilience, right? They're people who are successful in their careers and probably aren't all, are financially stable. And for many of them, they're doing jobs that they enjoy, they're in a later place in their careers, and so on. So we know that, you know, collectively this group is doing okay, they're doing pretty well. One other thing I will say about the Canadian average, Canada's life satisfaction overall has been dropping in the past few years, and Canada used to be really solidly in the top 10 for life satisfaction. It is no longer. It's still in the top 15 or so. But we have seen globally life satisfaction dropping over the past few years, particularly among marginalized groups. So women, people of color, and especially among young people. Now, I don't have demographic data of this subject for this subject, but board directors tend to skew older, right? We're all out there trying to find those great Gen Z millennial directors, but we know that board directors skew Gen X, boomers, and so on. So board directors that collectively their life satisfaction is quite high. And here's something I really love is that 96% of us find meaning and purpose in our board work. And again, that doesn't really surprise me because conceptually, work can be great for our well-being. Work can give us lots of things that we know are really good for our well-being. So things like purpose, structure, connection with other human beings, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. And those are all things I think, and I think this data shows that we get from board service. And for many of us, for those of us that serve on not-for-profit or social profit boards, then probably the organization's mission is really closely aligned to our own personal values. And so we do get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And 90% say that their board work has a positive effect on their overall well-being. And I'm so happy to see that because any of you who've ever been in any of my governance seminars or education pieces will probably have heard me refer to something that I think is really important. Mary Oliver tells us we have one wild and precious life. And if we are spending it at a board table, I have a strong belief that we ought to be getting something back for that. And I don't mean just board compensation on a corporate board, but I mean those kind of collaboration, meaning, sense of purpose pieces. And it looks like that is happening. So I'm really pleased. So this is great news. There's a different story under the hood. There's a slightly different emphasis under the hood. And I want to say, remember that two things can be true at the same time. People can find their board work meaningful and they can find it stressful and challenging at times and in different ways. So 88% of the directors that respond to the survey are serving organizations that are in a state of change, uncertainty, or crisis right now. And again, this probably isn't a big surprise. Like 2026 is an era of chaos and uncertainty. I know that here, for example, in BC, about a third of not-for-profits are not confident in their financial sustainability beyond the next 12 months, right? So there is a lot of uncertainty out there and there's a lot of pressure. So when you look at what is stressing directors out, this is what we found. For a lot of directors, nearly half, the time demands or workloads are causing a lot of pressure, right? And I think it's almost a universal experience that we join a board and we have an expectation of how long it's going to take, and then it ends up eating up a lot more time than that, right? Again, over a third have concerns about their own personal liability or accountability, and
Ah
particularly I
oui.
think in organizations that are having those financial sustainability concerns, that's going to be a big stressor for people. Again, nearly a third are feeling emotional load of high stakes decisions, and I really feel that. As Deborah said, I am the vice chair of Bard on the Beach Theatre Society, and I look back to during the pandemic when we had to make decisions as to whether to run our theatrical productions during a pandemic. Those were really tough decisions to make. They were emotionally very hard as well as kind of intellectually challenging. And then for a quarter of us, we're finding that the crisis-driven pace of the work is causing us stress, right? So again, these are all things that we might think, yeah, this is how board work feels right now, right? It is high workload, it is a demanding pace, and we're feeling that sense of crisis and uncertainty. And I think one of the things that really emerged from the survey is, again, that nearly 90% of directors say that their board isn't talking about stress and burnout and support for directors, right? So that to me is a big gap. And, I'm not saying let's look at stress and burnout for directors to the exclusion of everybody else, because, right now, the most recent statistics from April 2026, 62% of Canadian professionals are experiencing burnout. But boards that aren't talking about burnout for their directors may also not be talking about stress and burnout in the employees of their organization. And that's a really important responsibility for boards going forward as well. So I'm really interested in thinking about how can we, as a community of directors, as a community of governance professionals, start filling this gap and providing that support and addressing those structural issues. So, Deborah and I are going to get into a conversation, but first of all, I want to say if you'd like to dig a bit deeper into the results, this QR code will take you to the results page on my website where there's some infographics about what we found. And Keisha will also send out the slide deck afterwards as well, so you can get that QR code. So if you want to see a little bit more, I just wanted to highlight some things that stood out for me. But I'm really interested in keeping this conversation going and figuring out how we as a community can really address some of these issues. So I'm going to stop sharing for now, but thanks for listening.
Thank you, Shona, for that backdrop. So important. I am just coming back from Halifax. I was at the ICD conference in Halifax. I see you, Jennifer Dolman. I saw you there, and I'm sure there's a few others that were out there. And one of the themes was about agile boards, about this change and crisis and the adapting to change, right? So you address that in some of the gaps that are there. So it is consistent. So let's dig in. Excited to talk about what was really the catalyst for your conversation, for you to say, with all your governance work in the profession for 25 plus years, the boards that you're serving on, did you just wake up one day and say, I have to do it? What was the catalyst that really drove you to say, I'm going to create the first ever well-being pulse survey. Can't wait to see the results next year. But really, what was within you to say, okay, I got to do this. No one else is doing it. Was it a combination of things? What really drove
Yeah,
you to do this survey?
that's a great question, and I don't think it was one thing. I think it was something that's just been bubbling up for a long time. Because a couple of things that I've observed in my career. So as a board director, you know, as a board chair, I feel that pressure and stress like it's a highly responsible role. It's a very demanding role, and so I feel it myself. And when I think back to some certain key decisions I've been part of in boards, they've been challenging. And I spend a lot of time in my consulting role talking with organizations about well-being, talking about supporting well-being for leaders, for executives and leaders, and how they can create mentally healthy workspaces. But I always knew like there's a layer above that we're not talking about, which is the board directors. And then also in my career as a governance professional, I sort of have a bit of a theory that at some point all governance professional careers end in failure, or at least at some point there's a point in every governance professional's career where they end up in between a rock and a hard place at the chair and the CEO. And for those of you that have spent time in governance professions of Canada, I think it's kind of a common experience. And what are the support mechanisms we can create for the profession? And happy to talk more about the profession, but generally speaking, I think one of the big things that came from the governance professional survey is that governance professionals have really high levels of accountability, but they don't have the matching levels of authority. Like their work depends on persuasion and influence, so they can't always get to where they need to go. So that's a different conversation. But I think for me it was, I spent a lot of time talking to leaders about how they can create, how can they look after themselves, how can they create mentally healthy workplaces. And I spend a lot of time talking about boards and particularly the human aspects of boards. What is your board culture? How are you being effective with it? And so it was just a kind of gap in the center of the Venn diagram. And as you say, I was like, well, there's no data on this. There's no data on it anywhere. There's one survey that the Institute of Corporate Directors in the UK did about 5 years ago. There's no other data I've been able to find. And then at some point you're like, well, if nobody else is doing it, I guess I better do it. And had some conversations, including that conversation with you back in December, and people were really enthusiastic. So here we are.
I remember you pulling me aside in Vancouver.
Yeah, in December.
I was in Vancouver, and I have these pivotal moments. And we went to, I saw you at a breakfast event, a Vancouver event for ICD, and
Hmm.
you said, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this." I'm like, "You're thinking of doing it? We're partnering with you. Just let us know." So you're very convincing. I
Very,
think you're really
it's a
onto
compelling story.
something. You're
Yeah.
really onto something. And I also like the fact is it's really grounded. It's grounded in practical experience, not
Hmm.
academia, right? Like it's really went out to directors that we're serving. And so thank you for sharing the survey with our community and for those that responded. So I want to kind of unpack a little bit the meaning of sort of burnout, what that means, the
Hmm.
paradox. You sort of said on the one hand, here's the good news, directors are, 7.7% happier or pleased in the well-being, but then the offset was with, I call it VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity creates some stressors, right? And so, you spoke to that just briefly, but how do you think that directors, executives, governance professionals can really sort of, I don't know, fill that gap or work through some of those burnouts or those stressors that are happening today?
Yeah, no, really good question. And so burnout is a specific diagnosis. So there's three key factors that you experience in burnout, right? So the first one is obviously like exhaustion or really tired. The second one is kind of cynicism or negativity. And the third one is a kind of a loss of engagement or a loss of productivity. And like I say, from April 2026, 62% of Canadian professionals are experiencing burnout right now, right? And that's up from 47% in 2024. So that's a really significant increase in 2 years. And I mean, if you think about why, I mean, you only have to pick up your phone, open the Globe and Mail, look around you. Like as you say, we're in this very VUCA world. And in fact, somebody's moved on beyond VUCA and they call it REBA, which is like brittle, ambiguous. I can't.
Benny,
Yeah, Benny,
Benai,
that's it. Yeah, yeah. I can never.
brittle, uh, non-linear,
Incomprehensible. Yeah, it's
incomprehensible.
just,
I don't even know.
we're living in a completely wild timeline, and 2026 is kind of a hard time to be a human being, right? So a lot of us are experiencing that burnout. And I think one of the things that we really, because the term burnout was originally coined for the caring professions, right? For clinicians and so on, because people that are very emotionally invested in their work may go further down the burnout path because of that deep emotional investment before they finally crash and burn, right? And I feel like board directors are probably also prone to this because we care so much. We care a lot about the work. If we're working in social profit, not for profit organizations, we feel a huge sense of responsibility to the mission. And so we will keep going and giving beyond what we really should. And we're very bad at telling ourselves to stop. And the other thing is, people from marginalized communities, women, people of color, young people, we're also bad at asking for help, right? We take on a lot. So I think board directors and potentially board directors and not-for-profits, and like I say, I don't have the breakdown because this was a pulse check, but it might be something we explore next time, are probably quite prone to burnout. And for me, I can tell you, I know that I'm personally starting to like flirt with burnout when I really get into that. If you remember the Dorothy Parker, she used to pick up the phone and go, "What fresh hell is this?" When I'm in that mood, like, why are people emailing me? That's when I know that how dare they? Don't they know how busy
Walk
I am?
away.
Yeah,
That's time to
that's
walk
when
away.
that's time to really lean into self-care, right? So understand so as individuals, we can understand our signals and triggers, and we can then deploy self-care because burnout doesn't just like you can't just you can, this comes a point where you hit a wall, right? And that doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve your organization either. So we can deploy self-care, but also as leaders in organizations, as people who are being watched by the organization, right? If you're a board director, the things you say carry a lot of weight. Modeling good self-care, modeling good behavior is really important. And also,
So,
the board should also be asking questions about how the organization is doing.
it got me thinking. I mean, I'm just coming off 2 days at the conference.
Hmm.
But one of the things was the role of the chair, the relationship between the chair and the CEO, and that is tone at the top. That is leadership. And so, I know you didn't ask that question specifically, what can chairs of boards do? But,
Hmm.
there's that whole, concept, and there's a lot of discussions around psychological safety, right?
Yep.
And I know you talk about it, but that's
Hmm.
really important for your well-being.
Hmm.
So how do you, if you were a director, I know I'm going off script a little bit here, but it's
All good.
conversation. How do you ensure that there's that psychological safety in the boardroom, so it will create less stress and a better well-being for everyone that shows
Mm.
up. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I would say psychological safety is an absolute imperative for effective board functioning because there's a double whammy with psychological safety. And one is, as you say, it's more it's better for the people in the room, right? It's better for their well-being, it's better for their health. It's also better for the board as an effective governance mechanism because what is a board other than a group for collective decision making? And when there's psychological safety in the boardroom, different perspectives can be surfaced, constructive challenge can be raised, decisions are tested, and decisions are better, right? So there's an absolute imperative. And psychological safety, although the chair has a key role to play in building psychologically safe boardrooms, everybody in a room is responsible for psychological safety. And psychological safety is kind of the felt permission to be candid and to be yourself. So some of the things board chairs can do and some things I try to do when I'm chairing my boards is I always start with a kind of remember, we are here as a collective group for decision making. We want to hear from everybody. We want everybody to speak up. And then asking those kind of questions of like, who haven't we heard from? Are there any different perspectives? And the other thing is to make it really clear that everybody is responsible for their own comfort in the room. So people can stand up, people can take a drink, people can stretch, they can visit the washroom. I'll never, like when I started my career, I worked in the House of Commons in the UK. And in those days, as a clerk to a committee of MPs, I wasn't allowed to take off my jacket unless the chairman, said that it was okay. I'm like, that's ridiculous. We are adults in this room. Let's take responsibility for our own health and well-being and hold each other up. So I think there are things that chairs can do, but remember, if you're a board member as well, you're also responsible for psychological safety, and that means not being judgmental, not giving blame, not rolling your eyes, not being sarcastic, all those kind of things, being supportive of your fellow directors and the executives.
Well, and that's a big contributor to well-being for sure.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I love your stories. I'm sure we all have stories I can weigh in, but
Yeah.
no, we want to unpack. So, there's a divide, and you've actually been on both sides of the equation. You've been a governance professional, you're an advisor, but you're also serving on boards, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what are some of you did highlight some of the differences, and I know we were focused on directors, but that divide, how can directors help governance professionals be effective in their role? Like you've been in those, you said sometimes they
Yeah.
don't end well, right? Is there advice? You've got a group of directors here that are leading and serving on boards. Is there something that you would recommend or give some consideration to this group of directors as coming from a governance professional, right? Because it is a divide.
Yeah,
There is a
yeah,
divide.
it is. And one of the findings of for the governance professionals piece is that about a third of them say that their governance work has a negative impact on their well-being, right? So, so that's not good, right? We don't want that. It's not wildly inconsistent with what we see for most people in jobs, right? For many of us, although work could be great for our well-being, for many of us it is not. Um, and so typically the things that contribute to that are obviously financial uncertainty. So pay your governance professionals more if you're able to do that. Pay everybody more. But more like that wasn't it was not that that wasn't serious, but more seriously, the things people can do, the things that help people get the most out of their work are clarity on expectations, autonomy to be able to fulfill the expectations in the way that makes sense to them, and workload management, right? A huge amount of stress is to do with the fact that workload just builds up and up and up. Everything's a priority, no priorities get taken away. And so for governance professionals, they're working often in an area where they're on a kind of, it can feel a bit like a quarterly hamster wheel of board meetings. And for directors, it can feel like that too as well. Um, but they just finish one cycle of board meetings and then they're on the other. They don't get to control the periods of time when they're really busy. They often don't get to control when they can take vacation. So what would it look like to be more flexible about that? What would it look like to have a bigger team or a better resource team so that they can cover for each other? But you're right because I sat and served on boards. I've been a governance professional. I've also been a C-suite executive, and that's the group that I didn't talk to in this survey. So again, I don't know because I also feel that the intersection between boards and executives can be really, really positive, and it can be really difficult as well. So maybe that's another future piece of exploration is how can boards support the well-being of their CEOs and executives. And some of it will be about calibrating demand, I think.
So this came up in conversation recently, and I did experience it. So I'm sure a lot of the women Get on Board members and community that are here today have been executives or currently are executives. So
Hmm.
they've got this duality of being on one side of the table and then on the other side of the table. But I also remember back in the day, and this was in the mid 90s, it was all men showing up. I was CFO reporting into and it was in the tech sector. And I just remember in my mind saying, I never want to be like them, the way they showed up, right? It was,
Hmm.
how come you didn't do this? There was no relationship or anything like that. And I know we've evolved, but sometimes, so I think what inspires you if you've been on one side of the equation is kind of, oh, I won't do that. I don't want that person to feel that way, how I felt in that situation. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah. And it's something I say to executives who report to boards, who are reporting to audit committees, or whatever, is go out there and find a not-for-profit that you really love and sit on their board because you're going to learn so much about how to interact with your boards, the quality, the level of information they need. But I also say to boards, um, you don't want your executives to feel like they've been summoned to the principal's office every time they're coming to the boardroom, right? And we've all been in that situation probably where the executive walks out feeling like all their work has been handed back to them covered in red ink, right? The board has an oversight role, right? And the board needs to challenge and hold management accountable. But this is a partnership. The board is not the snarling watchdog trying to stop management get away with it. And you're right, that was the model like in the 90s, the principal agent model. That was the model, was very much like you got to stop management getting away with it. But in a well-functioning organization, particularly a purpose-driven and a values-led organization, your executive live and breathe that purpose and those values as well. So how are you more of the wise owl and the supportive wise owl while holding them accountable? But yeah, don't make your executives dread coming into the boardroom. Don't Those gotcha questions don't serve anybody, right? So there's a way that you can ask challenging questions. I mean, comes across as I care about this and I want to understand versus like, why are you such an idiot?
Yeah,
So
and,
so
and and it's
yes.
in that kind of tone of making people comfortable. I was in Montreal, and yes, I see Jeanette on this call. We were
Hmm.
in Montreal last week, Keisha and I, and it was on the future of the boardroom, and we had some panelists, and they were experienced directors as chairs of committees, and it was in the way you were asking the questions. It wasn't even so much what the question was, is to feel like you're not being attacked. It's like, well, help me
Hmm.
understand more. And I think that collective thinking is, as directors, we want to come to an informed decision, so we may have to make sure that we are asking all the questions and have the courage to make those decisions. But sometimes you may not have all the facts or the information to
Hmm.
make that decision. And I think for management, setting that expectation to say, hey, listen, your proposal or your whatever you're putting in front of the board may not get approval that day. And if it does have additional questions, it's okay. Like
Hmm.
to set that expectation as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a really strong element of treat people not even just the way you want to be treated, but the way they want to be treated. And nobody wants to come up to the board and be carpeted, right? Um, but sometimes you will see in boards, you'll see in psychologically unhealthy boards, a lot of kind of posturing and performative questioning. And that is deeply unpleasant for the recipients of the question, but it's not advancing the governance of the organization either. So yeah.
Well said. There's one thing I'm going to put in here because it
Hmm.
certainly is a stressor. It's certainly uncertain. Uncertainty is AI.
Hmm.
I can't help because almost every session had an AI component when I was out at the conference, but and I don't think you had specific questions on that, but it is a stressor. And then, you've got sort of some directors are very digitally fluid or AI fluid and others that aren't. And so how do you create this place of comfort and understanding. And, there was kind of, well, have an AI policy as a starting point.
Hmm.
But if it is a stressor, what are some things that governance professionals can do to support their board on getting more AI digital fluid, or what can directors do that you would say, this is not an AI
Yeah.
governance session, but
Yeah.
it is a stressor.
And I think, in terms of if you think about kind of AI stress, that the AI's impact on mental health is happening in lots of different ways. So one of them is just the vast amount of societal change that we are potentially looking at over the next couple of, months, years, or whatever, right? And in any kind of time of dramatic change and uncertainty, that causes, as human beings, we don't like change. We like what we know. And particularly right now, when people are talking about this kind of bifurcated future, one half of which is the post-scarcity world, AI does all the hard work and we're all going to have picnics and write poetry. Amazing. The other half is, existential crisis, superhuman AI destroys humanity, right? So those are very different futures, and we're talking about them a lot. So that's causing stress. For younger generations, there's I have two kids in their teens. There's an enormous amount of stress about what the future of work is going to look like and whether they're going to be able to whether there's financial sustainable future for them. And as well, I don't know how many people on this call are using AI. I'm going to think probably almost all of us, if not all of us. But there's a new phenomenon emerging called AI brain fry, which is this idea of, so we all know, we're all aware of Instagram's instant scroll, infinite scroll. So you know how you can Instagram, Reddit, everywhere, you just keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling. And we know that it's a trap, right? It's designed to keep our eyes, keep our engagement on it. And yet it's a trap I bet we all fall into constantly. AI's equivalent is the kind of, that's a really insightful question, Shona. You're so smart for asking that, Shona. Can I tell you three more things that will amaze you? Right? So there's this huge amount of validation that's built into the model, that gets you keep going and keep going. And I'm sort of old enough and wise enough to be like, stop. I don't want to hear when I'm right. I want AI to give me alternative perspectives and test my, what would somebody else say? What would a critic of this idea say? But I think, younger, less experienced people are probably going to be more vulnerable to it. And I think we're all a bit vulnerable to it as well. So AI brain fry is this being caught up in this trap of not being able to walk away. And there's a lot of FOMO involved, particularly for people who are working in, say, engineering, about like, if I don't keep up with AI, and I think directors are feeling this too, if I don't keep up with AI, I'm going to be left behind. I've got to understand this. I've got 6 months to get this right, or I will be completely obsolete. So, so I'm seeing AI's impact on mental wellness show up in lots of different ways. Um, and so I think, as far as supporting directors, one of them is saying this idea of change is, maybe it's bigger, maybe it's more dramatic, maybe it's faster than what we've seen before, but it is still change. So all the kind of organizational and personal resilience strategies you have employed in the face of economic change, the pandemic, cultural shifts, and so on, you can also employ them here, right? So that would be one thing. And the other one is in terms of AI fluency, is is to understand that you to understand your boundaries and limits, to understand when you need to switch off and walk away. And I've been doing a lot of conversations about this, and I wonder if one of the skills that we're really going to value in the coming months and years is the ability to switch off and go outside and touch grass, as they say, to apply perspective and just not get sucked into the frenzy of the chaos. But I would love to hear what other people's takes are, because one of the things about AI is, I guarantee you, anything I think and say about it today, in 2 months' time, I'll have a different view.
So that sort of, before we go to our Q&A, because there's great questions already coming in, and now kind of like, oh, I want to ask them at the time, but
Yeah.
this actually kind of is a nice way to end our conversation. Is, when we think about the future of governance and leadership, right? And you had 140 between directors and governance professionals
Mhm.
responding to your survey, which is great. What are some actionable steps that our attendees that are here today can
Mhm.
take back to their boards to ensure the future of governance leadership? And wait for this, because you already said it, take back to their boards
Yeah.
to be sustainable and human-centric, not losing that element of it. Is there,
Hmm.
I know you spoke a little bit about it, but is there any
Yeah.
takeaways that you would like to leave them with? Nuggets of wisdom, old, true, and tried, right? Because change is inevitable. It is happening. You can't run away from it. What are some things that they should, the
Yeah.
attendees, any of the directors, should, think about again, to layer on to ensure that
Hmm.
the company organization that they're serving as a director um, creates that sustainability and never lose sight of the humanity part of it.
Yeah, and I think, governance in the future is going to be a human endeavor because you can't hold a machine accountable for things. So, um, but I think, there's so many individual things. But if I was going to say like three things that people can do taking away this, the first one is, and it's a cliche for a reason, is put your own oxygen mask on first. Be aware of how you're doing. Check in with yourself. Uh, Try and like if you are verging on burnout, and look, most of us are. What do you need right now? So first of all, check in on yourself and model those good, healthy behaviors. Switch off your phone. Tell people that you're not available, right? So number one is that. The number two is a really simple, ask people how they're doing and listen to their answer, right? If you're a board chair, you've got a really good opportunity to ask your fellow board directors and your CEO and your executive, like, how are you right now? How are things feeling? 2026 is wild. How are you doing? Right? And listen to the answer. If you're not a mental health professional, if you're not a clinician, and I don't think I'm not, and I don't think anybody in this call is, you are not here to diagnose people's mental health and well-being any more than you would diagnose their physical health. But you can be a conduit to getting people support, and you can support people as well. And the third one is boards. I think boards really need to understand culturally what's going on in their organizations and how are their team members doing? How are their employees doing? Because organizations that are hitting all their financial targets, but everybody is burnt out, they're not going to be resilient. They're not going to be sustainable. And really, what have you won? If you're making money, but everybody is miserable as hell, like what is the point of any of that? So I would say look after yourself, ask people how they're doing, and really listen and ask questions about what the organization is doing and how the organization is supporting its people.
Perfect timing. You think you'd rehearsed that? That was great.
Off
Shona, thank you
the
so
top of
much
my
for
head.
sharing these
Yeah.
profound insights with us today. And I know it's a much needed conversation in governance. And so I'm super excited to turn to Q&A, hopefully some learnings and
Mm.
sharings. Hopefully we've got some time we can get through them. So I'm going to go to the questions and they're there. I was watching them come in. So I was
Hmm.
like, oh, that's a great one. So I'm going to turn it from Jeanette. Any suggestions on how to help directors differentiate between responsibility for those things we do and have control over versus those we do not, especially in current situations to help reduce stress? So, you know, how do you distinguish where there's things you have control over versus things you don't have control over? And Jeanette, I hope I summarized that for you.
Yeah, and that's the really good old, give me the wisdom to understand, what I can do. So I don't know, Jeanette, whether you're talking about like as an individual director, what do I have control over in my life versus like what does the board have control over?
Yes, it was
Which
more
one?
the latter. And I was, and I'm sorry, I was maybe not so specific. I was thinking specifically in the context of fundraising and for nonprofits. In this environment with economic distress,
Right.
especially in international development with USAID closing, and sort of the domino
Hmm.
effect that has in terms of the fundraising was the specific that I was thinking of, particularly for boards. Having to recognize that we do our best and to support management in fundraising efforts. But this is the reality we're dealing with. That was the one that was in my mind, but it could apply to other things too. Thank you.
Yeah, no, this really good question. And I think for fundraising, I'm definitely seeing a shift, and you are probably too in the not-for-profit sector, that boards are having to spend more time on development because of the financial situations that lots of those organizations are finding themselves in. And I think I would be very sad to see our board sector turn into a kind of pay-to-play sector where boards just get populated by people who can write big checks. That to me That means that we're losing diversity of thought, we're losing connection with community and interest holders, we're losing really good governance. That said, there's a lot of interesting work being done right now about like how can board directors helpfully work with development, and some of that is about, it's not about writing big checks, but it's about opening your Rolodex. For those of us that still have a Rolodex, I don't, but it's about connecting people. It's about being an ambassador for the organization. It's about showing up at like the events and so on. The ICD Journal had a really good article on this, like I want to say December 2024, that I could probably dig out a link to, about like what's the appropriate role of a governance board in fundraising. Give me a I might be able to find it for you. But yeah, I think directors carry a heavy load, and I think there's a really good conversation to be had with your team. If you have a team in your executive team, about with your CEO, with your executive director, with your fundraising people, about where can the board help and where do you want to stay and get out of the way. Like, you understand the strategy, and there may be operational things you can get involved in, showing up, shaking hands with the donors, connecting people and so on. But also you can't be, fundraising professionals are fundraising professionals. So how do you enable them to do their work best? I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'll see if I get a chance to dig out that ICD article, but I thought it was excellent.
And Shona, if you do, send it along to Keisha, because
Sure, I'll do
there's going to
that.
be a follow-up after this, but then we'll do another follow-up few days following with the recording, and we can include that. So if anything comes to mind, Shona, please.
I will do that. Yeah.
We'll
Okay. Taking note right now.
Lots of questions and lots of great passion in your responses. So from Brenda, in terms of thinking of board recruitment, have you observed changes on how boards are thinking about attracting board members who are resilient?
That's a good question, Brenda, and I don't think that's really surfaced for me. I think boards are looking for directors who've got something to say about the situation we find ourselves in. They're looking, and they're probably looking too hard for like AI experts who aren't necessarily, going to be able to govern AI. So I think boards are looking for, people who can speak to the external environment and provide insight into that. I haven't seen, but maybe other people have, that boards are looking for directors who are kind of personally resilient, who bring that kind of, not Pollyanna-ish, but resilient, optimistic, future forward, solution oriented mindset. I haven't seen people specifically doing that. But maybe we should, or maybe people are doing it and I don't know. So I would love to hear what other people's boards are doing. But I do think, you want a board, you do want a board where you have some cynics and pessimists, but you don't want a board that's entirely made up of cynics and pessimists, right? So
I was just reading, Scott Baldwin does his weekly blogs, and there's kind of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, and how people show up different ways, right? I think you need a balance. So we have a few more questions. I want to see if we can get to those, Shona. So from Barbara, I don't know if you want to come on screen and ask your question, because I think it's a great question. It's probably better to hear from you directly then. Are you comfortable to come on screen and ask Barbara McKenzie? Okay,
I'm
thanks.
good.
Hi, Barbara.
Sorry, I had to turn on my light here.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't really a question, but I appreciated the comment around boards asking CEOs and executives around their well-being, right? I think that the experience a lot of us have had on the executive side of the table is that transactional relationship. But the board, and I led an organization through the pandemic, and the board was like, how's the staff doing? How's the staff doing? But never once did they ask me how I was doing. And as a woman going through menopause, leading a team through pandemic, having elderly parents, all of those things were weighing really difficultly on me. But the question was never asked. And I think that experience now as a board director and a chair has made me a better board director and a better board chair for checking in on my executive team, going, how are you? Not about the work, not about anything like that, but you, how are you doing as a person? How is your well-being? And it's something I think we need to teach in governance training. right? Because we're so transactionally focused, we're not teaching that aspect. So I just want to think that was a great comment and something that I think we need to talk a lot more about.
Yeah,
Shona?
100% agree. And for two reasons. One, we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do, right? It's the decent thing to do. We should be asking people how they're doing. The other one is if you want to make like the business case for it, executive burnout is a big risk, is a big organizational risk. So, because executive burnout leads to poor decision making, it leads to sudden exits, it leads to discontinuity in strategy, it leads to lack of alignment in the organization. So if you can't get somebody to do it because it's like just a good human thing to do, you can maybe frame it in terms of organizational risk.
Thanks, Barbara. And you know what, Barbara, I think you probably typed in your question before Shona said, what are the 3 things you can take away? And the second one was asking, how are people doing and what is your well-being? But go beyond just the staff. It's the actual executive, the executive director, the CEO. And Shona, I think you had that as your number 2, to checking in and how for interest. Okay, so going to the next question. So thank you, Barbara. Christine is asking, can you speak to digital dementia phenomenon?
Can you tell me a bit more about what you're looking for there, Christine?
Yeah,
Is this the AI brain fry that I was talking about, or is it something different?
Maybe. Christine, can you come on? Yes,
It
Christine?
certainly is the brain fry you were talking about. And I thought it was, this is also a part of this whole push on the digital side for directors who, yes, have the passion to be in as a not-for-profit, the passion and the social purpose of that organization, but running into this potential digital dementia where they're burning out as a result. So I'm wondering if any of your survey participants had any kind of discussion around that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a couple of things. First of all, I would be really wary about calling it digital dementia because dementia is a clinical diagnosis. And as somebody who's going through a parent with dementia right now, I think the two things are not similar. So AI brain fry is what I've seen it called, and I sort of prefer that terminology.
Right.
But I think and it's not a question I got into in this year's survey, but who knows for the future. But I think you're right, because AI, like social media, is designed to keep our eyeballs on the screen, right? And although I would say in recent times, Claude, I use Claude a lot, has got a bit better at it. Claude is like, okay, go away now. I'm like, all right, Claude, what? But we need to be designing, or the people who are designing these AIs need to be designing them so that to make it less addictive. Will they? Well, if social media is any guide, no, they will not, right? They will not do that work. So I think as individuals, we need to be really clear about our boundaries.
Yeah.
And what is the time you have? What is the energy you have? What are the things that fill your cup where you're switching off and doing something, walking in nature, reading a book, having a coffee with your friends. And like, I am not proud of this, but one of the things I use, I have a tool called a brick, and it's literally like it's a little brick that switches off my phone, and it kind of switches off all the social media on my phone. And then if I want to unbrick my phone, I have to go to my fridge where this thing is and switch it back on again. And because for me, reading is really important. I read a lot of fiction. And if I don't switch off my phone, I won't, even though I love reading, I won't do it. I'll just sit on Reddit, or I'll sit on the New York Times and go like, oh my God, everything's a disaster. So I think AI, like social media, is designed to addict us. And that's not to say that it doesn't have really great use cases. But like I said, I think one of the skills in the future will be the skill of being able to switch off and walk away and recharge. So how can we do that? How can we demonstrate that we're doing it? How can we teach it to the young people in our lives and the people in our organizations? How can we make it really clear that we don't expect people to be spending their whole lives interacting with? I mean, I've got a friend who's a CEO in an AI organization, and he says it feels right now in his organization like everybody's on individual islands, just one worker and their AI, and none of the humans are connecting anymore. And he's worried about what that looks like in the future. And I think he should be, and I think we should all be.
Thank you.
But I would love to know what other great solutions people have come up with.
Well, we are running up against time. We've got one more question, and Jennifer, thank you for responding to Michelle on the resources for the Canadian Mental Health Association. Michelle, I'm just gonna, and I saw you out in Halifax. Michelle, do you want to just make your comments? If you could come on screen, that would be great. Love seeing everyone and the engagement. And Michelle, I know you're not shy if you're still there. I don't know if she's on mute. Maybe she stepped away. Okay, well, I'll ask the question. One of the is thinking about board education generally on a number of topics is an important way to support directors and governance professionals if they're under-resourced, right? And when boards are feeling better supported, can they help reduce or at least feel seen and heard? I believe that can help and to manage, or because we were saying, what are some of the tools? What are some things you think that directors could do? So Michelle's comments is really about continuing education and making sure that people have the tools, the resources to be effective in their roles as directors.
Yeah, for sure. And that people have an understanding of their own mental health and what their triggers are and what's in their mental health toolkit, how they can do that, putting on their own oxygen mask first, for sure.
I love how this group has become a collaborative group. There's a lot of resources. And then Keisha, maybe we can pull some of these to follow up because I think that there was some good discussions that we won't get to. I wish we had the time and I love the engagement. So Keisha, let's just make sure that some of those questions we can bring forward and maybe Shona can have some interaction with them as well. And we can follow up in our follow-up email, which won't be right after this, but in a couple days to come. So on that note, Shona, I want to say thank you to everyone for submitting your very thoughtful questions and for your engagement on chat. That's all the time we have for today. No surprise. I knew that we would never have enough time, which is always a great way to end. I want to thank you on behalf of the Women Get on Board community. Your insights on your Canada's first Governance and Wellbeing Pulse Check is truly eye-opening. It is a trailblazer. You are a trailblazer. It is a trailblazer in and of itself. When I think about it, like that's simple. Put your own oxygen mask on first, right? I was just flying, and of course they tell you before you help anyone else, put yours on. Secondly, just check in with people and how are you doing? There's nothing more, and I think Barbara spoke to. So it doesn't have to be transactional. Like let's get to the agenda and let's go do that. I think women, we are very strong in relationships and asking those questions. So if we can weigh in with that empathy and compassion a little bit more, that's how we should be showing up. And then, so just thank you so much. We will follow up with your slides. You provided the QR code. There's a survey that you'll all receive. So we'd love to hear back from you. You'll get a recording from this session in a couple days to follow. And, as we log off today, let's remember our commitment to building sustainable, inclusive, and human-centric board cultures and boards that we are proud, because you go back to people are about passion in the work they do, but there's passion, but you also want to be proud of the work you do. So I think the discussions today really gave us food for thought, really to step back, and we're all humans, right? And we can lead that way. And AI and the complexity of uncertainty is layered around, but I think you've given us some really great points. Is there any one last point you'd like to end on before we say goodbye?
Big thanks to you, Deborah and Keisha, for your support of this initiative right from the start. And let's keep the conversation going. There's great questions on the on the chat. I know people have got lots of amazing insights. Come find me on LinkedIn, email me. Let's keep the conversation going and figure out how we can support each other as we do this really important work.
And Shona, correct me if I think both of us will be out at the GPC conference in Victoria, and you're going to have continued conversations on this topic, I believe.
Yes, I'm presenting. I'm doing another session for CGIC, Chartered Governance Institute of Canada, on June 24th. And I will be presenting also at Governance Professionals of Canada in August. And registration links to that are on the website link that will send to you. So if people want to be part of that.
We've been promoting it to our community.
You're
I will
awesome.
be out there as well, speaking on elevating your emotional intelligence in the boardroom, which does dovetail very well
Which
to
is
your
absolutely part of it. Yeah, part of
yes.
this human-centered governance that
Love it.
we all want to
And
be part
then
of.
on a final note, thank you so much for joining us today. Our next speaker series is on June 25th. The topic is the complexities of CEO succession. It'll be sponsored by Southleigh Group. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.